What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Drive for Show DFS for Dough here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you talking golf. Another week and another golf tournament, another elevated event, even though we just had a major last week. So we've got plenty to break down here for you. Of course, I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84, your usual host. And bringing on a fresh face this week. And I don't know if I've ever done a show. I've certainly talked with Kyle Murray a lot, but I think this is our first time working together on a show. So Kyle, nice to be on with you in person. And how you doing?
Yeah, I think it is our first show. It's definitely my first RotoGrinders golf show. So excited to talk some golf with you. And yeah, other than that, things are pretty good. Excited for this event. I think it's going to be a good one. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we'll move forward to the Travelers Championship and talk about that in just a minute, of course. Probably worthwhile to just take a quick look back at the U.S. Open. And this is interesting because obviously I've got a pretty good feel for how my usual co-host Noto tends to break down events and how he feels about certain players and certain course conditions. So Oakmont last week basically playing to an even par type of winning score, which is what the old U.S. Open kind of quote-unquote goal was. If JJ Spawn doesn't make the 64-footer to win, the winning score is even par if he makes the next one. So otherwise, everybody else over par for the week. Course played, about 4 shots over par on average, depending on the round. And a lot of carnage out there. Lots of golfers not happy with the golf course. But curious on your take of the U.S. Open with a little bit of a different-looking leaderboard at the top.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there was a lot of obviously different takes, a pretty polarizing event in terms of like the entertainment perspective of it. But I think, considering it was a U.S. Open, I think that was, pretty ideal in terms of like the conditions. Obviously, I like to see these guys struggle a little bit out there. I wouldn't know if I would enjoy that every single week. Watching these guys get beat up, I do enjoy, the differences in courses every single week. But in terms of the U.S. Open and Oakmont, really giving those guys a tough task. I thought it was they did a pretty good job out there. And it's kind of funny seeing some of the guys, complain about how it's overly difficult. Because it's like these guys are so good. Some of the best players in the world complaining about the brutal conditions. So I do think that's entertaining at times. So yeah, I thought it was a great event. Obviously, that putt to win was pretty incredible. The 64-footer, like you mentioned, pretty, storybook stuff there for JJ Spawn. So it was definitely an interesting leaderboard. I thought it would be a little bit more stud packed up at the top, but I do think it's always cool to see an underdog story in these majors for sure.
Yeah, Shane Lowry was the big one for me. He was kind of caught on a hot mic there on Friday saying F this place and just had kind of packed it in. So for reference, he was plus 17 over 2 days. 79, 78. And I mean, in 2016, when the U.S. Open was held at Oakmont, Lowry was the leader after 3 rounds. So it's not like he didn't know how to play there, but clearly wasn't fond of the setup this week with his, plus 17 score there through the 2 rounds. And it was an early exit for him. Joaquin Niemann, Bryson, and DJ were all at plus 10. Fleetwood was plus 9. These are all guys who missed the cut. Patrick Cantlay plus 8. Ludwig plus 8 as well. So both of those guys missed by 1 stroke. But then, some of the guys who did make the cut, there was quite a few guys well into the double digits over par for the week. So it wasn't like you were just automatically guaranteed a top DFS finish just because you got all your guys through. Kind of had to avoid the landmines there on the weekend as well. But it was, quite surprising to see some of those bigger names missing the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially some of the top names that we really saw struggling, especially coming into like the betting perspective of it all. I think a lot of people were definitely let down by some of the top end guys, especially Bryson and Niemann was the guy who was a public favorite that a lot of people were on. He struggled. The Lowry stuff was quite hilarious though. He was just absolutely over it. I saw he got the penalty for not marking his ball. And then someone was it JT that had the really short 4 putt, that 3 putt from I think it was 6 feet or inside 6 feet or so. And
Niemann had one. Niemann had one. I know that was a 4 putt from 3 feet 6 inches.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. JT 4 putted, and 3 of them were like inside 6 feet. I think he got caught on a hot mic too. Not as bad as Lowry, but it was a little funny.
It was probably both of them. Neiman was the one
Yeah.
that I noticed, but yeah, it probably happened to more guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so just another U.S. Open. Obviously, it's a unique event, unique venue. Oakmont kind of is what it is. When they try to trick up all the U.S. Open venues like that, it just sometimes it doesn't work. So, sometimes I think they'd be good to just embrace a -6 or -8 winning score. But that course, especially once the rain started hitting on Sunday, there was just brute and basically a guaranteed layup if you miss the fairway. So kudos to JJ Spawn, though. I know a lot of people kind of throw shade when on quote unquote nobody or a long shot wins a major tournament, but I don't think that's fair to him. I mean, he certainly earned it. I saw people, tweeting out 80 watch on Sunday when he was 5 over through his first 6 holes. And for him to come back on that back 9 and do what he did, I thought was pretty cool. So no shade for JJ Spawn from me. He was certainly a deserving winner at the end of the week. Victor Hovland finished in 3rd place and was 2nd in the week around the green, which I think is noteworthy given his problems with chipping. Cam Young, another top 5 finish. So, and John Rahm and Scotty Scheffler backdoored top 10s with pretty good rounds on Sunday. But any other takeaways from the U.S. Open for you before we turn the page here?
No, I think, the weather was obviously an interesting factor in that one. But, I think looking forward to the next major, which will be the Open next month. But this will be a refreshing, different take on DFS and betting for this week at the Travelers for sure.
Yeah, so I'm not super fond of these no-cut elevated events the week after a major, but it seems to be kind of their plan of getting guys to play the week after a major is to throw these elevated events out there. So that's what we have with the Travelers this week. 72 golfers, I believe, in the field. There is no cut. And we've got most of the top golfers on the PGA Tour in the mix this week. TPC River Highlands is the course, has been the host course for this event for a long time. Why don't you just kind of give the people a brief overview of whatever you want to throw out there about the course or the types of golfers you're looking to target at a place like this, just anything general before we dig into the golfers.
Yeah, I think it's obviously going to be a stark difference from what we've seen over the past couple weeks. Obviously, the U.S. Open, the Memorial, it's going to be a shorter course, one that's definitely going to be playing a lot easier for these guys. We'll see scores, in the 20 under par potentially. We saw Scheffler 22 under last year. Keegan won the year before that at 23 under. And then in 2 of the 3 years before that, we saw 2 guys at 19 under. So it should be some decent scores, being had out here on this course. It's definitely one that, like I mentioned, shorter. I think it's playing like 6,800 yards this year. Was at about 6,800 yards last year. So, very short course in comparison to the PGA Tour average. But there's still some trouble out there in terms of just missing the fairways and whatnot. A lot of potential accuracy problems for guys could potentially lead to some more penalizing shots on their approach shots, and then a little bit of water in play on some holes as well. That will also add some added danger here to kind of have some defense around the course that in general will be playing fairly easily just because of how short it is. But adding it, with it being a par 70, there are going to be some shorter courses out here on tour, or some easier scoring courses, I should say, that will be in that par 71 or 72 range. So this one being a par 70 adds a little bit of an interesting dynamic compared to the other TPC courses. But nonetheless, these guys should definitely have their way with this course out here.
Yeah, pretty rare for a par 70 to get to that deep under par number. Because you're missing 2 of those par 5s. But Scheffler won in a playoff here last year at -22 over Tom Kim, and Keegan Bradley was at -23 the year prior, which was a course record, -19 in 2022, -13 in 2021. I think there was some wind that year, -19 in 2020 as well. So you look at 4 of the last 5 years, the winning score has been -19 or better. And just with this being a much shorter golf course than what we've seen in some of the most recent weeks, I think is going to be refreshing for some of these guys. I think all but about 9 or 10 of them played last week. So most guys are coming in with very little rest after that brutal U.S. Open. And I'm sure they'll find this one at least a little more welcoming in terms of not you can maybe recover if you miss a few fairways. but the overall length of the course isn't going to beat you down quite as much as Oakmont did. So, all right, with that, let's go ahead and dig into it here. And we've got 4 golfers above 10,000 on DraftKings this week. As usual, when Scotty Scheffler's in the field, I've kind of taken the approach that he deserves his own talking points here, just because his salary is, it's a step ahead of the others. It's not like everybody's tightly bunched here that's priced above 10K. Scheffler is 13.3, and that's $1,800 more than the next priced golfer. But if you look at the stats, I mean, the last 36 rounds, leads this field in total strokes gained, leads the field in approach, leads the field in ball striking, and he's 6th in putting. So it used to be the putter was the only thing letting him down, and now the putter's a weapon too. He had, by all accounts, an underwhelming week last week and still finished 7th. Just ridiculous how high the floor seems at this point. We've got a no-cut event this week, so we know everybody's playing 4 rounds, which is probably going to lead to more people trying to jam Scheffler in. We've got his projected ownership right now in the 40% range, which seems probably right. How are you feeling about how you want to handle Scheffler given the nature of this event and the likely chalk?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned it, with it being a no cut. And there are some guys down the board that I do have a good amount of interest in this week, but I think the no cut dynamic of it all does make it easier to get Scheffler. There's also some guys behind him that have some question marks around, either their form or what that may be. But so obviously he stands above the rest pretty clearly. I have him over like a stroke and a half better than the next best person in my model. So yeah, Scotty grades out really well. Not breaking any news there. He's been absolutely insane in terms of the game theory dynamic of it all. Yes, 40% is a lot, but I do think that on a event like this where there are guys that come into play just because it is a shorter course, I do think it allows different sort of styles to be, sort of in contention. I think that opens up some things for guys down the board in terms of, betting odds and whatnot. So I think there are ways to build around Scotty and still have, some ways to find guys who not only, score well, but also are in contention down the board as well. So obviously you need Scotty to probably, win or get a top 5 finish or so to feel great about paying this price tag, or just have guys in that 7.5 to below range pay off. But it is difficult to make a case for guys around him outscoring him on a routine basis, just because of how much better he's playing than pretty much everybody in the world right now. And it's just so consistent. Like you mentioned, the floor just seems so high right now. And then even with that price tag, he's still popping as the most optimal player in our projections as well. So yeah, Scotty's going to be a guy who I think that ownership is probably pretty accurate. I think it's probably pretty fair in terms of not only what you're sort of paying for him, but also just building lineups throughout the course of the week. So yeah, I think it's an overall good spot for Scotty, and I don't think the ownership is anything where I'm necessarily running away from it, but I think it's just more so being cognizant throughout the rest of your lineups if you are playing him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Obviously, you're not going to want to play all the chalk values along with him, but there are enough options in that cheaper range that I upgraded him to once I saw, I kind of like the way these lineups come together with some of these values at the bottom. Some guys that aren't popping as much in terms of ownership. So obviously we'll get into some of those guys as we go down the board. But I think it's interesting nonetheless, especially when you consider the guys, in the near vicinity of that salary tag again. So maybe the other 3 guys above 10K, Rory McIlroy, right, missed the cut at the Canadian Open by a lot, and then was off to a really poor start at the U.S. Open, did backdoor a top 20, but he was outside the top 30, top 40 for most of the week. Xander Schauffele has been playing okay, but doesn't have a top 10 since the Masters. And, Morikawa, same thing. He's been playing okay, but doesn't have a top 10 since the Players. So and then you look at Scheffler's game log, and his worst finish in his last 8 starts is 8th place. So, he's got these guys lapped in terms of recent top 10 finishes. Rory would be the obvious competitor, but he's been the one with maybe the biggest signs of struggle the last couple times out, kind of admitted after winning the green jacket, maybe my competitive edge slipped a bit. And then Schauffele and Morikawa, who've been playing okay, but not great. I just don't feel like I need to have any of those 3 guys. How are you handling exposure to them? I'm not sure if you're, multi-entering a bunch of lineups this week. If you're playing cash games or single entry, it just seems like it's hard to to prioritize any of those three, but McIlroy, Schauffele, Morikawa, if you have to pick one, any interest?
Yeah, I think right now the way I see it is, it's for me, it's either getting Scotty or getting a couple of these top spend up option guys. But in terms of the best way to pair up a couple of these guys, 'cause again, like I mentioned, I still like some of these guys down the board. I think having the no cut event, brings in more of these guys into play, especially in that sub 7K range. But I think my favorite outside of Scotty is probably going to be Morikawa this week. Again, touched on it earlier, the accuracy portion of this event. I do think that benefits Morikawa. I know he's had some struggles recently, especially with having those top end finishes. But again, in terms of just his ball striking, I think that's going to be enough to have him profile as a guy who fits well here. Putting does seem like it's going to be a question mark for Morikawa per usual. But again, if he's going to be setting himself up for chances early and often, I think that'll allow him to be in some spots to make some birdies. And again, it's going to come down to who can make the most birdies this week and continue to score well rather than fend off those bad scores compared to last week. And I think Morikawa can do that. But if I'm not playing Scotty, I'm probably going to find myself building around 2 or 3 guys in the 9K plus range rather than going overweight on one of these other top 3 guys in the 10K range. But if I were choosing between these 3, it would be Morikawa for me.
Yeah, I don't mind that call. A lot of these courses that we've seen in recent weeks have been driver heavy. Morikawa tends to play better on not that he's super short off the tee, but the driver isn't necessarily his biggest weapon. If you're looking at the statistical metrics, I mean, he's 9th off the tee here, but it's mainly been the putter letting him down of late. Which it should. That's variance, and he generally isn't going to be worse than 62nd in putting out of the 70 in this field over the last couple of months. So that should improve as things go along. So I'm in agreement. I think Morikawa is fine if you're looking in that range, but I'm in agreement that I think it makes sense if you're not playing Scotty to start in the 9K range. And I do think the balanced builds look intriguing as well. And there's not going to be as many people doing that. I mean, if we tally up the projected ownership for Scheffler, Rory, Xander, and Morikawa, that's doing napkin math here, is about 92% total. So almost everybody's rostering at least one of those guys. And if you're not, you're going to be a little bit contrarian. And you look at the guys in the 9K range. Cantlay starts it off. He's got impeccable course history here. You got Ludwig, you got JT. Sepp Straka has been a top 10 machine all year long. Sam Burns coming off a pretty good week at the U.S. Open, faded a bit there at the end. And Hovland at 9K coming off that 3rd place finish. So I like your thought process of maybe starting with a couple of the guys in the 9Ks in your non-Scheffler lineups. Who are some of your favorites in there?
Yeah, I think from a betting perspective, I do have 2 bets out on Straka and Burns as well. So I do like both of those guys. Burns, I do feel like he has a little bit more volatility. So I think I probably prefer him in the outright markets just because, again, the putter is such a weapon for him. I think it's pretty clear he's one of the best putters in the world, if not the best putter in the world. And that, leads to, a lot of birdies being made for Burns. But in terms of betting on someone's ball striking, repeating over and over again, he's probably not the guy I feel most comfortable with. But again, added volatility, probably leads me to liking him more in the betting markets. But Straka and JT are my next 2 favorites in this range. Straka is a guy who's been playing really well all year. He's kind of earned his way into kind of a higher tier in terms of, I think, the way people sort of look at him and view him. And that's translated to the betting markets as well. And he's another guy similar to Morikawa that I think could benefit from this sort of course where, the shorter track, I think, ultimately helps him here. Not a guy who hits the ball very far, but is very accurate off the tee. Also very good on approach. So again, another guy who we see his birdie or better numbers not look all that great, but I do think on a shorter course, and which has translated over the last 2 years, he's been top 15 in birdie or better percentage on short and easy courses. So Straka, I do think, gets elevated here in this spot. And then JT, he's been arguably the best player in this field on short tracks, short and easy tracks, according to some of the numbers here in the rabbit's hole at Betsperts. So over the last 2 years, on easy and short courses that are also par 70. He's number 1 in total strokes gained, number 1 in tee to green, number 2 in approach, and number 1 in strokes gained ball striking. So JT has some excellent numbers. So I think he's probably my favorite guy in this 9K range, followed by probably Straka and then Burns here in this range.
Yeah, Thomas is a tough sell for me. I tried to play some of him last week, and that went about a burnt toast. So, but I think it's interesting because nobody's going to be. We've got him at 18% ownership. My guess is that he'll come in under that because Straka's there, because Cantlay's there, and Cantlay's definitely my favorite of this 9K range. I think the other interesting one is Hovland. Like, you could tell that even though he didn't win, Hovland was second around the green last week, and that's so unheard of for him. I mean, usually the chipping has been a major problem with his game, and if he's got the around the green stuff figured out, he was 20th here last year, 29th 2 years ago, 11th all the way back when this was a full field event in 2020. So he's played well here in the past. Wasn't necessarily a super heartbreaking loss for him last week, because he wasn't like right there on the final holes, and he just seemed super excited about the way his game was translating around the green. So I think Hovland is really interesting. I didn't put him in my article, but he was the first cut out of it. He'll definitely be in my player pool in these 9Ks, and I agree that I like some of these builds that include a couple of these guys here. I'd probably rank them Cantlay, Hovland, Straka, Burns for my top 4. But fully recognizing that the JT, me not being off of him is largely because he's burned me a little bit of late. But it stands to reason on the type of course that you mentioned. And Thomas has back-to-back top 10s here as well. So really interesting range of golfers if you're not going for the super high end. Anything else from your side on the 9Ks?
No, I like the Victor Hovland shout there. Obviously, he looks pretty good in that closing stretch on the weekend at the U.S. Open, so no problem there. And he's also a guy who he can get hot with the putter as well. So I think if you are looking for guys who have had struggles with the putter, you just want to find guys who have the ability to heat up and get hot with the putter. And Hovland definitely checks those boxes for me. So I do like that call as well.
Good risk reward play, I think, for your GPP builds. All right, let's move down into the 8K range here. And if you missed the news, this actually broke this morning. No surprise, but Corey Connors, who withdrew before the final round of the U.S. Open. Obviously, you're not going to withdraw unless it's something serious. Before the final round of a major when you're guaranteed a paycheck. So Connors is out. And Johnny Vegas has replaced him in the field. So just make sure if you did some early builds or if you weren't keeping a close eye on the news, that you're not rostering Connors. And I know that DraftKings did add Vegas to the player pool. But so Connors is out. He was 8.7K. Just make sure you're not rostering him. We've got Tommy Fleetwood, Russell Henley, who tends to be a favorite of my usual co-host, Noto, at 8,800. Last week's winner, JJ Spawn, who nobody's going to play, coming off a major victory. You've got Bobby Mack, Keegan Bradley, Shane Lowry, who we mentioned at the top of the show, Jordan Spieth, Hideki Matsuyama, and Ben Griffin as the primary players here in the 8K tier, which, again, if you're going with that balanced build, you're probably getting a guy or two in here. If you're starting with Scheffler, maybe this is where you're getting your second golfer. I don't think this range is quite as strong as the 9Ks. But getting into the 8Ks, you probably got to have a guy or two in here in your player pool. Who do you want to highlight in this middle range?
Yeah, I got a couple of guys who I also bet to win the tournament in the picks on Scores and Odds. Henley is one of them as well. So hopefully I can pass on the torch there for Noto and recommend Russell Henley. I do like him quite a bit. Again, he's another guy who fits this course really well, in my opinion. The guy when the course is going to shorten up, that really benefits him. You mentioned 72-man field here in terms of driving distance. He ranks 71st. So I do think that that's sort of a weakness for him that gets neutralized on this sort of course. And that, I think, will allow the rest of his game to look much better. Because, when you look at his stats across the board over the last 6 months, he's top 20 in every single strokes gained category other than off the tee. And I do think a lot of that is because of distance. Because overall, he is a very accurate driver of the ball as well, ranks 6th in accuracy. So, Henley's a guy who I think fits this course extremely well, and I do think that this sort of shorter track will, elevate the rest of his game. So he's probably my favorite in this range. Also have a bet on Keegan Bradley again here. Went to him last week. Obviously, he won this event 2 years ago. He's a guy, again, it's always going to be volatile with the putter, but in terms of ball striking, you kind of know what you're going to get, right? He's very accurate. He's very consistent with his irons. And also the wedge play has been very improved for Keegan Bradley over the last 6 months. So that's a spot that I really enjoy looking at, positive improvements there for Keegan. And again, like I mentioned, clearly fits this course well, won this one about 2 years ago. So, and then behind those two, I would probably put Tommy Fleetwood there. My model really likes Fleetwood. I didn't really get to a ton of, personal exposure for Fleetwood so far. But, he does grade out really well in my model. Another guy who, shorter course, good with his wedges. I think that'll all, help him here. And Fleetwood, again, another guy who's very hit or miss with the putter. He's 13th in strokes gained putting over the last 20 rounds, but he's 52nd over the last year. So it's been very hit or miss with the putter, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just kind of got to hope that you get the hot putting week. So those are probably my top 3 in this range. Also like Ben Griffin in this spot as well. If he's, the next guy that you get in this range, he's been one of the hotter golfers in the world, 4 straight top 10 finishes. So Ben Griffin's looked really strong as well. Obviously had that nice finish at the US Open, finished second at the Memorial. So Ben Griffin probably 4th in this range, but I don't mind if he's that 8K range guy that you start with, if you want to make it a little bit more balanced after Scotty. But overall, I do want to have a way to get either Henley, Bradley, or Fleetwood if I'm starting with Scotty.
All right, I accidentally closed out the show. I hit the X on the wrong tab for a second, so I wasn't trying to leave you leave you stranded the first time co-hosting the golf show. I came right back. So this range, Griffin is probably the guy playing with the most confidence on tour right now. So like that call, and then heard your take on Keegan there too. So interesting options in the 8Ks. My favorite's going to be shooting for that bounce back with Lowry. Obviously, he didn't have to stress about anything over the weekend. Otherwise, has been playing really solid golf over the course of this spring. I'm not concerned about him in the long run after, one bad week. He's also got a 19th and a 9th here the last 2 years. So Lowry will be a key piece for me at 8,300, especially if his ownership stays down where we have it now. I think it'll be a little bit higher than that, but definitely a play that you can consider for your tournament builds. And again, a lot of these guys will be kind of key second options in those lineups that you're starting with Scheffler. I think, Henley is probably the safe kind of cash game type of choice with the others that you mentioned, plus Lowry in the mix there being your GPP options. Anything else in the 8Ks that we missed?
No, I think that pretty much covers it for me.
All right, so let's go ahead and move down into the 7K range. And again, this one has a ton of options. So we'll talk about the upper part of the 7K range first. Just looking at our projected ownership, the guys that we have above 7,500 at double-digit ownership, we've got Sung Jae Im and Cameron Young right at 10%, Siwoo Kim at 14%, Daniel Berger and Aaron Rai, who are right at 7,500. We have in the low teens as well. You've also got guys like Adam Scott coming off a good week, though he also faded on Sunday. Harris English, Tony Finau, Taylor Pendrith in the upper part of the 7K range. And you're going to need some of these guys in those Scheffler builds or go into the bottom part of the sevens. But anybody that's standing out for you in here?
Yeah, I think as of now, Siwoo Kim is probably my favorite in the upper 7K range. I don't see myself getting to this range, all that significantly, because I do like a couple guys in the mid sevens or low sevens, and then even a couple guys that I'm excited to talk about in the 6K range. So this probably isn't a range that's going to be super popular for me, but Siwoo is probably my favorite in this option. Again, another guy who, again, sort of fits the bill of I think he'll be better on this course, have his game sort of elevated because it is shorter. He's been a guy who's done well on these sorts of courses in the past. And again, another guy, 7th in accuracy, 61st in distance. So I think that'll sort of offset some of the off the tee issues that he's had in the past. Obviously, putting is also another issue with Siwoo Kim in terms of having that be a consistent win for him. But again, he does have some spike putting weeks in there, so I don't mind chasing a hot putter for Siwoo Kim. But again, I don't think it's going to be a range in this upper 7K range that I'm attacking all that often. Not because of not liking these guys. It's more so they're sort of just sandwiched in between players that I do like. For example, in this range, I would probably rather find a couple extra $100 and get to Ben Griffin, or spend $300-$400 less and get to a couple of these cheap guys that I like.
Yeah, I kind of fall into that same boat. Like, I think these guys are kind of okay. I know Dan Bach has drove the Cam Young train the last couple of weeks, which has been tilting for Noto and I, because every time we've tried to play Cam Young, he's been an absolute disaster. Dan comes on the show for 2 weeks, and Cam Young rolls off a couple really strong finishes. I don't think it's the course for him this week. Obviously, the driver is his biggest weapon. And we've got a course that doesn't necessarily emphasize the driver this week, but I've been wrong on Cam Young most of the year. So if you're actually a Cam Young fan, then it probably helps that I'm saying that. But nobody that I feel like I have to have in this range either. I think Finau is all right. I think Siwoo's all right, but nobody I feel like I need to have in here. So, all right, let's move down to the bottom part of the 7K range, 7,000 through 7,400. I'll be the Noto supporter this week on Brian Harman. Anytime you get a shorter course, Brian Harman has to be on the radar. He's not been playing well lately, but again, a lot of those have been on driver-heavy type of courses, which aren't great for Harman. He's got 4 straight top 10s at this event. He's gained over 40 strokes on field average in those outings, and he's only 7,200. Not going to be super chalk, so I'll drive the Brian Harman train this week. I also like Harry Hall a good bit. He's one of the few that did not play the U.S. Open last week, so he should be ready to go. So Harman and Harry Hall are my 2 guys that I am prioritizing in the lower part of the 7K range. Who are you looking at in there?
Yeah, I like the Harman call. I think the best part about Harman on these sorts of courses is because usually it's, like you mentioned, it's been a couple of weeks where he sort of gets beaten up because the courses don't necessarily fit him, so people aren't necessarily on him in a big way. So I do like that call quite a bit. The 2 guys that I like the most in this range are probably going to be Aaron Rai and Daniel Berger. Again, 2 pretty volatile putters, but 2 guys who have shown some really strong ball striking over the last 6 months. Berger's in the top 10, Aaron Rai in the top 15 in strokes gained, ball striking. So both of these guys are striking the ball well. And again, 2 guys who are very accurate, but not necessarily super long off the tee. So I think that'll benefit both of these guys here. Rai's had some success here over the past few years, T24 2 years ago, but nothing crazy to ring home about. And then another name that I'll mention is Akshay. He's a guy who's very up or down, right, in terms of what you're getting from him, but another guy who's performed really well on short courses. The putter has been much improved over the last year or so. He finished T5 here last year, so volatile option, but a guy who I do think has some win equity here in this range. So Rai, Berger, and Akshay are 3 guys that I do like, as well as Brian Harman in this range.
Akshay is above average in this field in putting over the last 24 rounds, 36 rounds, and he's top 15 in approach. So interesting angle on a shorter type of course. I don't mind that call. And again, a lot of these guys, taking some of their stats with a grain of salt because we've been playing on more driver-heavy courses. Yep. Some of these shorter hitters, I think, will pop back up into the mix this week. You look at guys like Denny McCarthy, just hasn't been good in some recent events in that same mold as an Akshay or a Harman. All right, let's go down to the rest of the golfers this week. We've got quite a few guys in the 6Ks. Obviously, all of these golfers are pretty good because they made it into an elevated event with only 72 golfers. So it's not like we have a lot of club pros like we did last week, or lower end type plays that you're just not going to consider. There's guys that have had good results in recent weeks down here, though you're probably not going crazy with exposure in the 6Ks. I'll let you start off the value conversation. What are you looking at maybe to round out those Scotty lineups?
Yeah, honestly, this is probably my favorite range of the week. I think there's a lot of really good options down here, and I do agree. I don't think you want to go necessarily overboard with 1 or 2 players, but I do think there are 5, 6, 7 guys that you can build sort of like a core value group, especially if you're max entering. But the first guy I'll start with down here is Bud Cauley at 6,800. He's been playing really well as of late. I know at the U.S. Open, he had that rough Friday. I think he shot 79 to miss the cut after shooting an even par 70 in the opening round. So that was just one of those weird things where after the first round, he looked great, had a really bad second round there. I do think people are going to be sort of off of him after that tough performance last week. Another guy who scores really well on short and easy courses is Max Grazerman. Another guy who has, extreme strength with that putter. He ranks third in this field in strokes gained putting over the last year. So I do like him quite a bit. Another guy who scores really well in terms of these shorter courses that are easy. So those are probably my top two options in this range, but a couple other names that I do like. I like Ben On here, 6,300 going all the way down. He had that strong finish at the Canadian a few weeks ago. And again, he's a guy who sort of has all of his game elevated here in these sorts of courses in terms of where he's been at over the past 2 years on courses that are short and easy and in par 70s. He ranks inside the top 5 in total strokes gained, second in strokes gained off the tee. So typically not known as like a overly accurate guy, but he's benefited here on these less than driver courses. So I think he's an interesting little angle option where I've been talking about all these guys who have more accuracy and not a ton of distance. Ben On does not fit that mold, but over the last couple of years, he ranks second in strokes gained off the tee in this field on shorter courses. So I do think he's at least in play as a highly volatile guy. And then the last name I'll mention in this range is Eric Cole, another guy who's seen his scoring increase in these sorts of events, the shorter courses, easier events. So he's another option that I like all the way down there at 6,200 this week.
Yeah, don't mind some of those calls. Of course, I did tag Bud Cauley in our lineup HQ, so totally agree with the analysis there. Another guy, shorter hitter, hasn't been doing well in some of these recent courses. I'm not going to hold one bad round against him at Oakmont. If you look at last 36 rounds, he's 11th on this field in approach, 15th in putting, 16th in ball striking. So, the stats are there that he was third at the Charles Schwab just a few weeks back. So it's not like he's been that far off. So I really like Cauley there at 6,800. Sam Stevens is another guy that the short game metrics have looked really good recently. He hasn't been as good with his irons, but I think some of that is, a little bit of sample size noise. But the short game's been there. We've seen some upside from him in the past. So I don't mind looking at him as kind of a 6K type of punt as well. And then, if you want to sprinkle in somebody like a Benny On or a Kevin Yu, or that would be a risk reward guy. Kevin Yu, another guy that kind of leans on the driver a little bit. So maybe a little bit muted his edge on this type of course, but that is pretty cheap for him for the amount of strokes he can gain off the tee. So those are my main values, Cauley and Stevens, maybe Ryan Gerard as well. You could throw in that mix, but again, a few more rosterable options in the 6Ks than usual, and that's what leads to maybe a little bit more appeal for getting Scheffler in there at the top this week. So that pretty much takes us through my player pool. I think obviously a pretty condensed field this week, only 72 golfers and no cut. So anything else, Kyle, from your end?
No, yeah, I think the last thing I would say is I think obviously we talked about all these options down here in the cheaper range. That's going to allow Scotty to be more prominent in lineups. I think that's going to elevate some of his ownership. I think talking through the slate with you kind of has me thinking that 38% number that we have in there might even be a little low, especially in some of the smaller field stuff. So just keeping in mind where you're going with the rest of your lineups if you are starting with Scotty and making sure that you're not doubling or tripling down on all the chalk guys.
All right. With that, we'll call it a show for this week. Next week, I believe Kyle's going to be back with me next week. We've got the Rocket Classic. It used to be the Rocket Mortgage. I don't know what the word mortgage did to the Rocket Classic, but they've kicked mortgage out. So it's just the Rocket Classic now, maybe some rebranding on their end, but Rocket Classic in Detroit next week. Then we've got the John Deere in my neck of the woods. Unfortunately, I'll be on vacation that week, so I won't get to talk about my hometown type of event, but a couple of more easier courses coming up these next few weeks. So be in Detroit at Detroit Golf Club next week. So we'll break that down next Tuesday. Same time, same place. And Kyle, it was nice to do a show with you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. For Kyle and for TJ, always working hard behind the scenes for us. We thank him for his work. I am Justin. We hope y'all have a great week. Hit that like button. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We appreciate that very much. You can get notifications whenever we go live for all the other sports as well. We've got you covered at RotoGrinders.com. So until next week, for TJ, for Kyle, I'm Justin. We'll see you later. Good luck, everybody.